If you find friction at that point where you're putting a price out and you're getting uh, pushback in terms of this is too expensive, or many of the reasons that you could get, that's a symptom that somewhere along the way, that conversation that should have clearly articulated what are we doing, what are we solving, what is the impact that we're going to bring, and how what I'm charging you offsets that with what I'm offering, it has not been done as effectively as it could.
B2B sales isn't broken, it's blind. Buyers don't see your value, deals die in the budget queue, and the best solution doesn't always win. Guy Talk brings the voices reshaping how you sell, win, and grow. That's Guy Talk, hosted by me, Guy Mobley. Welcome back. Thank you so much for joining another episode of Guy Talk. Today, I'm so honored to have with us Juan Elias. He's a partner here at Beyond Banyan, but he's also a global leader, an author, an advisor in RevOps, go-to-market strategy, and sales excellence. He's led at many different organizations across the board. And like I said, he's an author. He has his book, From Strategy to Revenue. So help me welcome Juan on to Guy Talk. Juan, thank you for joining.
Hi, Guy. Nice to be here. Thank you. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking back. I was looking back at your resume, and it's quite impressive. And Ryan and I had talked a couple times. He's like, when we bring Juan Elias on, like you need to spend hours with him and just see how his brain works through optimization and through sales. Can you take me back to different points in your career where you saw like yourself as, hey, this is my superpower, or this is what I'm really good at. I'm going to lean into this at these organizations and see what comes from it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me first try to live up to that expectation. Let's put it out there, just as a caveat. But yeah, let me tell you, I am an industrial engineer by trade, right? So uh, I see the world through processes. Ironically, I've never set foot on one manufacturing plant ever because my first job started, yes, as an automotive company, but I wasn't really in the commercial side of things. And as I was delving into that, my my first big project was really around trying to improve how, in that case, dealerships better treated their customers in a more sustainable and consistent way. And that required that there was a whole revision and reinvention of how that customer experience was shaped, right? And in doing so, also try to understand how those different contact points allowed for, let's say, in this case, a repair shop to prospect work and being transparent in terms of how would that translate into, let's say, pricing and time and many of the things that probably are somewhat familiar today that are table stakes if you go to any dealership or repair shop. But 30 years ago, well, 30 years ago, that's a long time. That was not the norm. Fast forward later in my career, I held uh, different sales roles, all the way from being a frontline sales rep to leading a whole sales organization, selling uh, industrial products like lubricants to B2B customers. And again, that process-driven mindset kicked in, and I started looking at the sale as a process itself. And I wanted to understand what is it that make the output of that process more repeatable. And that's the type of discipline and mindset that I try to instill in the teams I was working with. And that started to become uh, something that was actually yielding results. So if that clarity on what is it that we were trying to execute and doing that consistently was in place, obviously with the right uh, skills that require the activities to be performed to be in those who were doing that, results would follow. And at that point in my career, now in a big oil company, the company itself was trying to uh, regain the global market leadership, market share leadership of those lubricants that we were selling. And some of the root causes that they understood were hindering that goal related to the ability of the organization to be truly a selling organization. What that meant was there was no discipline around having a clear sales process, executing that consistently, and all the things that go into understanding your customers, building a pipeline, using that pipeline information to really drive and prioritize where you focus your efforts, and have that translated into what was required of those executing that process. So at that time, all of that rigor was not in place, and a global program was created just to structure all of that. And I was invited to be part of that organization, and I was pretty lucky at the time where I was both double hatting my current sales leader role in that time and stepping into this new program and helping shape it out. That gave me this unique opportunity to first, do what I was preaching. So I started applying many of the principles that were coming out of that program into my own sales organization, and lo and behold, it paid off to the point that at that year, I was awarded as one of the top performing sales leaders globally that from our region, and and that gave me first the insight of, yeah, this works. Uh, I know at the same time knowing how to apply those things and translate it to those who were in a similar sales leadership role as I was, and I took uh, this role of helping those leaders and business leaders in a different country in the region to help them understand what was their level of maturity against that reference of how good should look like when it came to an effective sales organization working, and what were the things that needed to be done to get to that level of maturity. So going back to your question, I think that's where I realized that I really enjoy doing that, really connecting the processes, the data, and the business impact all in one place, and at the same time helping others transform to a desired state that was proven to be valuable to the business. And that's where basically I shifted from having been a sales and marketing leader, if you will, to the go-to-market strategy, operational slash enablement side of things. And I've been in that space for the past, again, those too many years, but probably almost 20.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
here we are.
that's super interesting because, I consider myself to be a methodical thinker. And when you're going through and you're creating those processes that are repeatable, sales, whatever it may be, I'm sure it's translatable through many different things. What are the what are the key, steps that you're looking at that say, hey, we're going to take your current state and we want to transform you into this future state? What are the dots that you're connecting in your head?
Yeah, that's the very starting point, really, of any of these conversations. And more concretely, that starts with really understanding what is the outcome that this process, in this case, go-to-market process that you want to shape, are to be achieving. And then the answer to the question is pretty simple. We want to sell, right? So we want to generate revenue. Now, that is easier to say than done, but in starting to reverse engineering that outcome, the revenue itself is a result of a decision of a customer to buy. Yeah, at its very essence, at the foundational level, there's an interaction with the customer that eventually translates and ends with that customer's trust in giving you money in exchange of whatever service or product you are selling, right? And then the number of layers of complexity that you can add to that. So going back to your question, this starts with really understanding what is that revenue model of the company or the organization you want to transform, and more importantly, how is that revenue model eventually complementing or aligning to the way your target customers are actually buying and what shapes that decision. And more importantly, what is the problem that you're solving for them as you do that. Now, I throw there a number of questions which are very relevant and many times overlooked for many different reasons. For legacy, because we've been doing this for many years, and we haven't necessarily realized that our market has changed. But going very pragmatically and starting with this is what we do, this is how we help our customers, this is who our target customers are, and having that clarity and then understanding how those customers that you're targeting are actually buying what you're actually offering is the foundation to say, okay, if I understand that buying process, I can design around it my own selling process and therefore understand what is that it takes in terms of activities that need to be performed to achieve, let's say, intermediate outcomes that get that customer to ultimately have that trust that we already mentioned, to give me many times significant amount of money in exchange of something that we are promising that are going to impact their business. And if you take that even further, that process from a go-to-market perspective and a customer management perspective doesn't stop there, right? So once you make the promise and you got the yes, the most important part of that promise now comes when you need to deliver that, and you need to then show that that value that you promise is actually happening, and it's truly delivering on the impact that those conversations that originated that decision in the first place are actually materializing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that last point you're making is so vital because, in college when I was making decisions on, what did I want my job to be, one of my mentors gave me a great advice. He said, if you're going to go into sales, be a salesperson that under promises and over delivers. And don't be the kind of salesperson that over promises and under delivers. What, and from your perspective of being a sales leader, how do you make sure that your team and your people are delivering on the promise that they are giving to a client, a prospect, whatever it may be, to secure that yes, and then to continue having their business down the line?
Well, before delivering on the promise, let's start with the promise itself, right? And this has to do with how are you uh, coming across that customer conversation, and what is that value message, so to speak, that you are putting on the table. And everything I just shared before, from a more operational and structural perspective, systemic point of view, uh, needs to be in place for you as that seller to be able to have that right messaging with you. Trust that that customer that you are actually getting in front of is aligning to the customer where you're most likely to win, and all of that work should have taken place before you even engage that, right? And that's what uh, gets many organizations in trouble, so to speak, because they focus a lot on what that particular salesperson needs to do without ensuring that all of the ecosystem and the structure and and the operational framework and the answers to all the questions that we have been discussing so far are known, so that we are setting that rep for success every time, every day, right? And then with that being defined, going to another question that you asked, the role of the sales leader is not only ensuring, let's say, that you guys are doing what you should in your interactions, but every member of my team and my sales organization is doing that at scale, so that the repeatability of that likelihood of winning those deals transforms into the maximum impact that you can have, and therefore the revenue that comes along with that.
Right. Okay. And I mean, and I think about like, you know, and this is just, I'm not sure. This is the first time I've been in a sales organization. I can imagine how important it is for there to be a consistent message from the newest sales rep to the most uh, experienced, how do you make sure that you're, maybe there's 25 years between the two. How do you make sure the most experienced sales rep and the youngest sales rep are always saying the same thing and are always communicating on the same page and giving the same value message?
Okay. So to be clear, the answer to your question is not necessarily that people don't inject their own personality in bringing that value message to the customer, but they do so in a way that doesn't miss to expose all of those, let's say, talking points or concepts that should be known to trigger the reactions and the responses from that target customers that you're engaging. Now, how you do that, it's first documenting and having clarity of what is the structure of that value message. Uh, a good exercise is being able to say in one or two sentences what that value message is in a way that is understandable and conveys the right uh, clarity on the other end to engage and looking to continue that conversation after that initial prompt. Right? So the value message initially becomes the hook that creates that curiosity on the customer side, on the prospect. And in this case, for the sake of the argument, I'm talking about a longer cycle sales process, not a transactional interaction where I come to you and at the end of our conversations, we end up in an agreement or not whether you're going to buy what I have to offer, which yet includes and demands that that clarity of value messaging is in place. But for the sake of the value that that brings into more complex sales cycles, missing to have that value message at the start can erode any possibility of getting further. So in that first conversation, that value message should allow you to say, okay, this is my understanding of the problem that you have. This is what we can do for you, and this is how we've done it for others. Do we have an potential opportunity to go in deeper into exploring how that can look for us working together, right? And if the answer is yes, we would probably agree to go into uh, sharing resources mutually so that my organization has access to yours. I can go deeper in probing many questions that would allow me to better shape how that value hypothesis that I said in terms of understanding or inferring what your problem is it translates to the actual problem that you have and work together with you to prioritize okay these are all the things that we could be addressing these are the ones that we believe are the root causes of your problem and therefore let's agree where to go first and what's the scope of what we want to solve for you and that shaping then or this is what I'm going to do for you this is what's going to cost you and these are all the products and services that are going to come and if we do that effectively the decision of let's say buying right and bringing that revenue that we are looking from a sales perspective should be a natural evolution of that conversation and not necessarily a stressful experience right if you find friction at that point where you're putting a price out and you're getting uh, pushback in terms of this is too expensive or many of the reasons that you could get that's a symptom that somewhere along the way that conversation that should have clearly articulated what are we doing what are we solving what is the impact that we're going to bring and how what I'm charging you offsets that with what I'm offering it has not been done as effectively as it could and taking all that back to what we do at Beyond Banyan we help our clients peel that onion to really understand where all those potential areas of friction or broken processes or gaps might be so that they can get to that point where they bring that clear value proposition with a clarity of how that impacts their prospects and customers businesses at scale and that's a space really that we look to help and that conversation usually starts with a very concrete positioning of uh, the value of selling value, if you will, which probably I would say no one can deny that is helpful. But as you start getting and digging deeper into that, you realize that potentially some clients are in a better space from a maturity perspective than others to just grab some tool and use it themselves, because many of the components that we define as foundational, the clarity on the value message, the clarity on your processes, how those who execute those processes are actually capable of doing that, may not be in place. And that's another space that we can help and shape into a tailored proposition to really get that customer to that level of maturity to execute at scales and bring that revenue consistently most of the time.
Hmm. And as you were saying all that, I started thinking, you know, we were talking earlier. You need to understand what you want your end goal to look like. So when you're in your current state, you can transform that process to get you to your end goal and your future state. How much of that starts with, and this is kind of going back, I was just thinking about your book, from strategy to revenue. You know, is that the first step? Is creating that strategy to get to the end goal, or can you kind of expand on that idea for me?
Sure. So let's be clear on what that strategy means and involves, right? So I'm going back to my book, okay, shameless plugging, which I have here. Uh, when you start that planning process, that strategic planning process, really what you're doing is first understanding what is it that you do and how you want to generate revenue and via the offerings that you have, and first starting to quantify how is that solving what problem to whom, right? And as you define that profile of customers at that very high level yet, you need to quantify what is the size of that market potential that you have out there, right? So if, let's say, if you're selling tires, let's say I'm selling car tires, I want to understand how many cars are out there that could buy the tires that I have, and that's an initial number. So you have an order of magnitude of what your potential is. Now, the if that's an established market, there are other competitors that are probably selling tires. I'm continuing with the example just for the sake of the reference and the clarity. Then there's another layer of that, which is okay, with the resources that I have, the capabilities that I have, uh, there's a subset of that potential that I'm going to target initially. So let's say that there's 100 million cars out there, but I only can manufacture this particular size of tire. Let's say because that's how I'm starting. There's a subset of that 100 million cars that use that tire size, right? So that gives me a, let's say, 50% of that market, just to give you an example. Now, that still might not be the full potential of what I can do, because then there's a matter of what resources do I have in place to cover that market of that 50% of the overall potential of vehicles that are using tires, if I define my business like that. And that's where you start understanding, okay, how is that market distributed of this particular size? And you may see that there's more an efficient way of saying, hey, I might concentrate on the west or the east side of the country, where there's a bigger concentration of the vehicles, and therefore I can put either a limited number of stores or have a number of reps that are going to be based on covering that territory as a starting point, which ultimately defines what is that obtainable market that it's shaping your business goals. So that's the very first step. Now, with that clarity, and that's going to feed the entire uh, processes that go into resource allocation and ultimately as well the value definition of your messaging, right? But with that number in size, so now you have a size of what you're going after that you're capable of, and you're deciding to capture, which eventually shapes where you are locating your people to engage those customers where they are, but also understanding who those customers are. So now you know that there's a certain owner of a certain vehicle that has a certain tire size, continue with the example, and they might be using that vehicle for a particular use, and they go through different challenges that relate to the product that you're using, which go from the need of getting those tires installed to the durability of those tires and the economic cost of replacing them 3 times a year versus two if you were to provide a better material for those tires, let's say. And all of that should go into understanding that life of that target customer and therefore shaping and defining how are you addressing all those things that that customer needs, hopefully better than your competition. Which brings us back to what is that value message that differentiates you and gets you, let's say, a seat on that table to even have a conversation whether you should be considering me as a vendor for those tires. Again, going continuing with the example. So so far in this strategy planning space, we define what our target market is. We define who our target customers are. We define how we're going to address that in a differentiated manner and how we are allocating resources accordingly to be able to get to those customers where they are. And that has other implications in terms of whether selling via rep is their best channel coverage versus having a distributor or having that customers to go to a website and buy themselves our products. Those are also shaped by how the customer wants to buy and how they want to access those products. But all of that ends up shaping that what I'm calling our go-to-market strategy in a nutshell in that first go-to-market planning piece of the book. Now, with all of that, then we already mentioned that by knowing our customer, we know how they prefer to buy. That should lead us to understand and map what is that decision process that the customer goes through from the moment they say, I have a problem, to the moment they want to solve it and how they want to solve it and what's the impact of solving that problem. I need to understand that so I can shape my own selling process around that so that I catch that customer or prospect when they are considering whether they have a problem or not. And if anything, I can help them think through whether that's the case. And that should be the starting point of my selling process and even the qualification of the leads that I'm generating and who I'm targeting and how I'm saying that this is a viable opportunity that I may choose to pursue or just let go because that's not the best use of either times of both ourselves as sellers and the customer or prospect as such. So you design now your process, and that process, if you design it well, should allow you to understand, again, reverse engineering from the outcome of that decision to be made and what goes into that, uh, how you're going to surface those more concrete needs that become the priorities that your solution is going to address, how, and therefore that defines a stage where you want to have a more uh, inquisitive engagement, meaning you're going to ask more questions or you're going to pitch things or tell things because you're really looking to understand how uh, uh, that problem that you're trying to solve really shapes and translates in that customer's particular world. With that, you're going to use all of that and say, okay, these are your most important things to address. These are all the rules in my all the tools and products in my suitcase that I can complement or put together to address that. And therefore, this is how I shape a proposition to you that helps me articulate how each of the things that I'm offering are going to impact that problem that we agree that you have. And hopefully, if I'm doing that well, the price that I'm putting to that solution is going to shape what is that return on that investment that you're paying as a customer based on the results we're going to get and give you an objective view of how that makes sense from a business perspective. So in any case, if the cost that I'm saving you, the speed that I'm giving to you in terms of generating your revenue and accelerating it, or how you're better differentiated from your competition and selling more, should be offsetting what you're paying me for doing what yields that outcome. and that shapes that value selling journey, if you will, where, as we mentioned earlier, if I'm doing that well, that should evolve organically as a very straightforward decision. Now, everything that needs to be in place for that to happen connects back to that architecture of that operating model we're discussing. The availability of that sales process, the the clarity of what are you getting paid as a selling organization that is rewarding the behaviors that I want you to have. So at the very least, you want to ensure that the paying and the compensation structure that I have is not preventing you from doing the things that I want you to do because you're making less money if you do so. Does that make sense? And continuing with that, then you will find all of the other components that go into operationalizing those different types of motions, from understanding, you know, that big deals require probably a different type of internal and customer coordination because there's a lot at stake that usually demands that. Understanding how we're going to feed that pipeline with the opportunities of those target prospects so that you can execute on them and then manage that pipeline accordingly to understand what and how those opportunities are flowing, where are they falling, if that's the case. So that gives me the understanding of whether there is an issue that I need to address in how we're executing to compensate for that gap or that leakage of the pipeline, all the way to uh, with the clarity of who needs to do what when, how that is shaping your own enablement efforts to set those people for success, so they know when what they need to do, when, what are the tools that they need to use, and what good looks like in doing so, and help them get there while you're monitoring that from a systemic perspective. So as you can see, and as we said earlier, the very basic answer to your question has an easier answer than actually what it takes to get there. But in doing and knowing that, uh, first you understand that it's possible, right? And that's a place that we play as consultants in helping you get there in a way that yields results sooner than later, or at least those results allow you to fund longer cycle or longer term changes that you need to make in a way that is sustainable and affordable for your business.
That's
I know that was a
yeah,
mouthful.
I think I don't know. That's very process driven, and I like that methodical uh, point of view, and it makes a lot of sense. And if that is your superpower, and like what you were saying earlier, I 100% agree. I think you do it very well. Um, and I want to thank you for your time. This has been a great conversation. I've learned so much for you, and I'm excited to read your book. Um, and you know, this isn't going to be the only guide talk that you and I have together, so I'm super excited for the next one already.
Well, first off, again, I appreciate you having me here. I really enjoy the conversation myself. Hopefully, I haven't discouraged you to pursue to grow in your sales career at all. And definitely, I'm looking forward to continue to work together and helping you in any way that I can.
I'm absolutely encouraged. And, you know, I picked Beyond Banyan as my place out of work or out of college because I loved the people I was going to be able to work with. And the fact that I can have conversations with great mentors and great people and they've been successful in all their roles. That's the reason I'm here. And I'm absolutely enjoying being able to, you know, hey, Juan, can I pick your brain about this? It's not like, you know, I have direct tap into people that have done a job for a long time that are veterans and elite in their positions and get to pick their brains like this. So it's so much fun and I look forward to continue to working with you as well.
So you're saying it's fun to work with old people,
It
basically.
yeah
Thank you.
yeah it is it is. All right, Juan. Until
Thank
next
you,
time.
guys.
Yep. Have a good
Until
one.
next time. You
Yes.
too. Bye
Bye.
bye.